Hi, today we're going to be doing Lesson 8, Session 1, and this is our first session in reading and writing decimals. Today we'll take what we know about decimals and place value and use that to explore the correct way to read decimals. We're going to be working in our Ready Math workbook on pages 145 through 148. To get us started, though, I think it's really helpful to go over some decimal vocabulary that you may or may not know. I think that this will help you to better understand the next few days worth of math. So I'm going to go ahead and go over a few of these decimal vocabulary words with you. So the first word that I'm going to go over is decimal. We actually had this word the last session as well. A decimal is a number containing a decimal that separates a whole from fractional place values. So the example that we used is 3 and 52 hundredths. This whole thing is called a decimal. This little dot in the middle of the decimal is called a decimal point. So when you have a group of numbers that has a decimal point in the middle, that makes it a decimal. Place value. Place value is the value of a digit based on its position in a number. So I wanted to kind of go over the place value for you. Remember that everything kind of starts at the 1 and then fans out from the 1. So I'm going to zoom in a bit because I do have this color coded and I think it is helpful. So the first thing to remember is that we always place the decimal point to the right of the ones place. So you will always find the decimal point in the same spot. Then it's always next to the ones. You may not have you may not have a digit that needs to be in the ones place, but it helps to put a 0 there so that you can remember where the decimal goes. Then if you're talking about whole numbers, from the ones we go to the tens, the hundreds, and the thousands. If we are talking about a decimal or a part, then we're going to go down from or to the right from the ones place. We'll go over, we have our decimal place, then we have our tenths, our hundredths, and our thousandths. And I wanted to show you what that looks like in each of the place values. And then just remember that every time you move a place value over, that you move over by a power of 10. A mixed number is a number with a whole number part and a fractional part. So an example of a mixed number would be 2 and 3/8. That shows us that we have 2 wholes and then we have 3/8 of an additional whole, but we don't have a third whole. So we have 2 and 3/8. And then there's 3 common ways that we're going to read numbers. We're going to read them in standard form, we're going to read them in word form, and in expanded form. So I wanted to start with the decimal 5 and 387 thousandths. The standard form is the way a number is written with numerals, meaning just writing the number with the numbers. So this decimal number here is 5 and 387 thousandths. That same number in word form would look like this. Word form is the way a number is written with words or said aloud. So for example, we would write 5, and then anytime we see a decimal point, we write the word and. That word and means that you have 5 wholes and 387 thousandths. So you would say I have 5 and 387 thousandths. You think of this whole part here as the number 387. So in word form, it would be 5 and 387 thousandths. And then finally, we have expanded form. Expanded form is a way to write a number to show the place value of each digit. So expanded form for 5 and 387 thousandths, one way you can write it would be like this. 5 times 1, because you have 5 one in the ones place. 3 times 1/10, because there's a 3 in the tenths place, plus 8 times 1/100th, because there is an 8 in the hundredths place. And finally, 7 times 1,000th, because there is 7 in the thousandths place. Today we'll also explore a couple of other ways to write expanded form. But that just gives you a really brief overview of the vocabulary that you will need to work on with decimals. So with that, go ahead and turn to page 145 in your math notebook so that we can get going. All right, so today we're going to explore reading and writing decimals. In previous lessons, you learned about decimal place value. Use what you know to try and solve the problem below. So we've got this problem down below. Now remember, anytime we read a word problem, there's 3 questions we're going to ask ourselves. The first question is, what is this problem about? And I like to use the red pen for that. So what is this problem about? Then the second question you're going to ask yourself is, what are you trying to find out? I typically use blue. It doesn't really matter. And then the third question is, what is the important information? And I like green for that. So let's go ahead and read the problem and then ask ourselves those 3 questions. Jessica reads aloud from a science website. She comes across the measurement 0.32 meter. I didn't want to say it right on purpose. How should she read this measurement aloud? Explain how you know. So the first thing we're going to do is say, what is this problem about? This problem is about Jessica, who's reading aloud from a science website. Now, what are we trying to find out? What is it that we want to know? We want to know, how should she read this measurement aloud? And then what important information do we need? Well, we need to know that she comes across a measurement of these digits here. So we need to figure out, how should she read this measurement? I want you to go ahead and pause your video and try to show me how you think you could show how she should read this value on your own. Make sure you pause it. Okay, here's what I would do. I would go ahead, and there's 2 different ways we could do this. The first way that we could do this is we could make ourselves a place value chart. Now, place value charts are not that difficult to make. You just draw a rectangle, and then you draw a line in that rectangle, and then we see that there are 3 digits in this place value, plus we need a column for this decimal point. So we're going to make one part there for this 0. Then we have our decimal point, and then you can split this in half for our 3 and our 2. Then we can go back and fill in what are the different place values. So we know that what place value always comes next to the left of the decimal point. That's right, it's the ones. Remember, the ones is in the middle, and then we fan out from the ones. So we have our ones, and then we have our decimal point. Next, we have our tenths. And then finally, we have our hundredths. So if we look at it this way, we could read this as, we see that we have a 3 in the tenths and a 2 in the hundredths. I like to think of these 2 numbers together. And then I look to see what is the smallest place value that we have available. In this case, it's the hundredths. So I would read this as 32 hundredths. Because I have my smallest place value is my hundredths, and I have 32 of them because I read this all together as 32. Okay, another way that you might want that you may have drawn this or to explain how you would count, how you would read that word would be, okay, well, I know that since 32 hundredths has 2 digits to the right of the decimal, it can be written as a fraction. With 100 as the denominator. Now, the reason that I chose 100 as the denominator is because this second digit here is in the hundredths place. Remember, this is the tenths and this is the hundredths. So I know that my denominator needs to be 100 because this second, the last digit is in the hundredths place. So if I had 30, if I had this decimal, I know that I have 32 of them, and my denominator would be 100. So we could say this as, again, it would still be 32 hundredths, but it looks a little bit different. Sometimes it's easier to see it in fraction form, but it would still be 32 hundredths. Okay, so now let's go ahead and turn the page to 146. On page 146, looking back, we can explain how to read 32 hundredths aloud. We wrote that on the last page, so I would just write C page 146, as long as you copied down or you followed along with me in the video. Now, looking ahead, here's some of what we'll be learning over the next couple of days. On the previous page, you used words to say the standard form of the decimal 32 hundredths. You can also use expanded form to break apart a decimal by place value. You can use either decimals or fractions to write the expanded form of a decimal. Complete each missing number to show 2 ways to write 32 hundredths in expanded form using decimals. So one way that we can write this in expanded form is we can break apart our tenths and our hundredths. So how many tenths do we have? We have 3 tenths. So we could say, I have 3 tenths. Then I can say, okay, how many hundredths do I have? I have 2 hundredths. Now, I cannot just write it like this. If you write it like that, it looks like 2 tenths. You have to put something in this place that holds the place value. So what do we always use when we need something to hold the place value? That's right, we add a placeholder 0. So this placeholder 0, it tells us that we aren't talking about tenths because this 2 is in the hundredths place. So this 32 hundredths can be broken apart as 3 tenths plus 2 hundredths. We can also break it apart another way. Another way is by saying we have 32 hundredths. How many tenths do we have? This right here tells us that it's a tenth. We have 3 times 1/10. If you multiplied 3 times 1/10, it would look like this. So we have 3 times 1/10 plus what number times 1/100th? That's right, 2. And if we multiplied out 2 times 1/100th, we would get this 2/100ths up top. So here are two ways you can write in expanded form using decimals. Now we're going to complete each missing number to show two ways to write 32/100ths in expanded form using fractions. So if we look at this 3, we have some tenths and we have some hundredths. How many tenths do we have? That's right, we have 3/10. So this is written as 3/10. And we have 2/100ths. So if you put a 2 here, that says 2/100ths. And when you add the 2 together, you get 3/10 plus 2/100ths, which is 32/100ths. You could also break it apart like you do up here. And you can say that I have how many groups of 1/10? I have 3. And 3 times 1/10 would be 3/10. How many groups of 1/100th do I have? 2. So if I multiplied 2 times 1/100th, I would get 2/100ths. Now I want you to reflect. How are the different expanded forms of 32/100ths alike, and how are they different? So what I'd like for you to do right now is tell me two ways that they are alike and two ways, oops, two ways that they are different. Go ahead and pause the video here and write down the two ways they are alike and the two ways they are different. Okay, you should have paused the video and you should have that completed. I will be probably going over that later, so make sure that you have that completed. Now we're going to go on and look at this graphic organizer that talks about expanded form. So what is expanded form? Expanded form is the way a number is written to show the place value of each digit. So some different examples of expanded form. If we have the place value drawn for 52/100ths, we can show the decimal 52/100ths as 5/10 plus 2/100ths because we have 5 in the 10th place and 2 in the 100th place. Here are, I know this is tricky, 4 different ways that you can write expanded form for the decimal 46/100ths. This is very similar, or it's almost exactly like what we did over here in part A and B. So we could expand 46/100ths by making it 4/10ths and 6/100ths. We could expand it by saying we have 4 times a 10th plus 6 times a 100th. In fraction form, we could say 46/100ths is the same as 4/10ths and 6/100ths. Or we could say it's the same as 4 times 1/10, because that would be 4/10ths, plus 6 times 1/100th, because that would be 6/100ths. Those are all ways to write in 46/100ths in expanded form. Here are some non-examples. This one's really important to point out because 46/100ths does, if you added 2/10ths and 26/100ths together, you would get 46/100ths. However, that's not showing you expanded form. That's just showing you another way to add 2 decimals to get to the same answer. Expanded form keeps the same digits and uses them to break apart the number into understanding the place value. Another non-example would be 2/10ths plus 5/10ths equals 7/10ths. This is adding fractions. That is not expanded form of writing decimals. With that, we are going to go ahead and complete pages 147 and 148, and then you're going to go ahead and do your exit ticket. As always, if you have any questions, you can email your teacher. See you soon.